I can go first. I got a demo I've been working with Conrad and Steven on. Which screen? So we have a notion of extends in our model, and maybe also too. This is not quite done yet, but getting closer. We have a notion of extends in our model, but our extensions are all like uh, real objects in the sense that they're tied. I'm hearing some phone.
That was me. Sorry.
Yeah. But the real objects and will basically create validated errors when they're not tied to specific things. So like if you've got a view model that you want to extend, it can't be an abstract thing. It has to be tied to it, or else it provides a huge amount of validator errors. We've now added a new feature to enable abstract views or abstract model objects. So views, topics, fields can basically not be tied specifically to a column or a table in the database, but they can be logical constructs that can then be extended. Other modeling tools, like Looker, for example, has this notion of basically extension required. They're sort of like abstract objects that basically you have an interface that you want to provide, and then can apply it. And so, like for things like templated analysis, so like blocks and stuff, it's super useful. So we've got now a very similar construct. We sort of called it abstract for these model objects too. In this case, imagine this is a user templated analysis here, and I've got two pieces of logic I want to apply. I've got a full name thing that assumes there's a first name and a last name user field object that's going to be concatenated. There's also a piece of metadata. In this case, like I didn't have time to build a user lookup demo or dashboard in my local instance, so I just am gonna link out to the dashboards on demo. But basically, we provide metadata, and it'll basically be composed together with this base user object that we've got here too. And this is how you could build things like hub and spoke. If you got a centralized model that's basically a bunch of logical constructs, and then you want to go and
do not touch.
You want to have a bunch of specific, materialized versions of it, like each departmental use case or something like that.
What is the abstract true thing doing here?
It's saying that these things should not be validated as real objects, and instead are actually just abstract objects too. So if you just as an example,
I feel like if it could look more like a normal view file, it would be helpful. So like that, I mean, these are just small things, but like that at the top, like essentially, like I at least for me as like a not that thoughtful person about the system, like table name non-existent is more clear than abstract true, or like, because we're essentially saying this isn't attached to a table is like the summary of what it means, right?
For views, yes. For topics, they could also be, and for fields, they could also be too. And so like it's like I'm very open to so it's one at the top, but it could be
definitely should be at the top because like it has to declare what it is. It's just I think it would help if it was more descriptive of I don't know how, but
the Looker term was extension required, which is not like it is more descriptive. It's just not, I'm not sure.
That's probably one that just talking to everyone here, I think if we can figure out ways to describe this that is more self-obvious to people, I think that's always really, really helpful.
Yeah, I think that's not crazy at all. And just to show people too what it looks like, I probably should undo the abstract through. Basically, what it means is this user object, like any other extension, effectively can pull in that full name and can pull in metadata about the ID, so that the full name is the concatenate space and the concatenate, but like you get what it's effectively doing, and it also can pull in this metadata where it's effectively composing this object inside the user. So this is like our user dashboard or something.
Jamie, is this also where you'd envision putting like fields that are dependent on two views and that type of stuff, like the stuff that you would do a bear join with in Looker.
Yeah, you could very easily do it that way too. You wouldn't necessarily have to. You could create a view though that basically is dependent on those two joined objects and express it. The hard part with the two different joints, you may want it to specifically depend upon those two fields, and you want to make sure that join comes in too.
Yeah,
So like it may not be like a locally scoped, definition of a
it
field.
wouldn't. Yeah, no, you're right. It wouldn't be.
But like things like an example, this was like prompted partially by Conrad's new views inside topics and being able to do aliases. I think there would be effectively renaming things. So you've got sellers and buyers on a user's table where you may want to do it. You may want to implement the user's table as effectively an abstract view with a bunch of either metadata or uh, dependent measures that user count or count users that are new or whatever it might be,
So
and you apply it in both
rolling that forward though, how's that going to work with like a schema update and like can it then reference the table itself but abstract itself away too? Or
the abstract views are not tied at all whatsoever to database tables or database in
yep.
general. So like think it basically what it's defining is like an interface or construct that it requires from a table that's actually going and extending it. And to the extent that it doesn't exist, so just as maybe like a simple example, so like this requires a first name and a last name, and if last name doesn't exist, like we want to delete it. Last name is not found in users. Basically, if I go here, it's not actually navigating me to the right validation problem. But like it's basically giving me this error because this field is depending on another field that's not actually present. So like you will get it really does look like a field that's basically depending upon the actual specifics too. It's really defining an interface, and we should error whenever that interface is basically broken. Yeah, there's a few things that are a little bit weird too, and like there's we have this layered model approach also, so like you can imagine actually extending an abstract view and changing things in it, and maybe we'd do that in a workbook model, but like it gets kind of even more complicated quickly. But yeah, this should be powerful for things like hub and spoke. It should at least enable it.
Just a quick follow-on question from that, Jamie. So in terms of like coverage for hub and spoke versus Looker, like would this meet a lot of the needs of like
This would be effectively 100% of what Looker does. What we don't do though is the project import style pulling in other external but like you could at least in theory, within a single, Omni model have all of the functionality that they had to. There may be use cases where you'd want to have abstract models and reference models that are in other defined in another place in some way, which we do not have the ability for yet. But like functionally, I think we'd be able to replicate it all. It's just organizationally, it's not the same. And like we obviously don't do multiple connections against the same models still too.
yeah, thanks.
Yet. We don't do that yet.
Yet. Yeah, exactly.
When you have an abstract view that references something like last name, but your schema has like a family name column, does that just mean that you have to go into your model and alias last name to or family name to last name?
Yeah, so like yes, basically what the abstract view is saying is I expect the user's view to have a last name field in it. You could do that in a number of different ways too. It could be that you effectively have SQL, last name, and then the SQL is basically referencing a separate column for it. You could alias a separate column. You could also too have like whatever the family name be a field, and then extend the abstract view and overload that abstract view's reference for it too. I think that's where our layered approach actually might be super interesting. So like when we do template analysis is like what Looker does in blocks, we could actually have more composability and more customs. Like one of the things that's painful is everyone's schemas are different. Like maybe you've got Facebook ad data, but you have Facebook ad data in Postgres versus like inside BigQuery versus, and you maybe have completely separate schemas in addition to completely different SQL that's going to be referencing it to, and we could potentially overload it at the templated level, like at the templated analysis piece. The abstract view could be actually customized.
I I think I follow. The sort of place I'm going to is like when I think of inheriting from like an abstraction, and like a good IDE and good programming language, you're basically making a declaration like, I want to inherit this interface. And then your tools give you really good feedback about like, this thing expects, the following values. Like this thing expects a last name value. And I could almost imagine a world where like in that extend declaration, you just define the mapping. You say last name colon family name or whatever. To satisfy the expected interface. And maybe that's what you mean, and maybe that already exists in your implementation, but that's kind of where I'm going with this.
Yeah, I think that makes sense too. Though it's not as explicit. My implementation is really lightweight. Really, it's like turning off validator features. So like it's not like we have all of the extension logic already. The way you would do it in our system today would be basically having that separate field that you'd have to have like a last name field inside that view. But I like that idea a lot. Sort of like explicitly defining that interface is not crazy at all. Because like we really like all of our views, all of our model is kind of they're APIs to data, they're interfaces to data explicitly too, and we just want to make sure validator at least tells you when they're broken.